Welcome to my third attempt at giving you my final thoughts on my recent Himalayan 450 test ride. Yes, my third attempt. So the first attempt was actually recorded on the way home from that test ride, and you could tell that I was disappointed by the extent of the vibrations I'd experienced on the test ride because my comments were kind of pretty negative. So I didn't want to use that footage because I didn't think it was measured enough. A few days passed and I had time to reflect, and then I felt that I could look at the Himalayan 450 in a more positive light. So I decided, okay, I'm going to go out and film another video and I'm going to talk about the Himalayan 450 test ride experience in a sort of more balanced way. So you're actually watching the footage from that ride, but I'm doing a voiceover because during this ride, actually riding Norman on the trails turned my positive thoughts about the 450 back into negative ones because I was just noticing more and more ways in which probably Norman was better for the things that I need a Himalayan for. So yeah, you can watch that footage, but I'm going to give you my thoughts now, my final thoughts. And really, this has been a bit of a roller coaster ride to get to this point. But I'm now going to give you my final opinion, having just done a brief test ride. So here we go. Right, so first up, of course, we have to talk about the vibrations. If you saw my test ride video, you'll have noticed that I was quite disappointed by the level of vibration and also the speed at which the vibration appears. So that would be 55 to 60 miles an hour, the kind of speeds where you spend a lot of your time riding the bike. For me, the vibrations are unacceptable. I know everybody has a different level of tolerance for vibrations, so they may be okay for you, but it's definitely something to be aware of, and I would strongly recommend that if you're thinking about buying a Himalayan 450, that you try to get a test ride on one and you take it onto a fast road just to get a sense of what the vibrations are going to be like. Admittedly, they will probably get a little bit less as the engine gets running, but I think they're still going to be quite significant. So yeah, the vibrations were definitely too much for my taste, and I wouldn't consider this engine to be acceptable in its current state. Perhaps Royal Enfield could come up with a better way to mount the engine in the frame, how to mount the pegs and the handlebars, just to isolate the rider a little bit more from this engine. I think if they could do that, it would be absolutely okay. But currently for me, the vibrations are just a little bit too strong, and they're very high frequency vibrations. So I do find my hands and feet quite quickly starting to tingle, so it's unpleasant. But on a positive note, whilst the new engine, the 450 Sherpa engine, may lack refinement, it certainly produces good strong power. I was actually surprised by how hard the bike can accelerate when given the opportunity, and when I was accelerating off that one roundabout in my test ride video, when I gave it a decent handful of throttle, I think I was in second gear at the time, the bike shot forward so quickly I wasn't expecting it, and it nearly left me behind. So yeah, this could actually be a genuinely quick, at least at times, a genuinely quick Royal Enfield. I think you could have fun with this engine. It's just a shame that the extra performance seems to have come at the cost of refinement. Another positive is the new 6-speed gearbox fitted with this engine. As I mentioned in the video, it has an incredibly light action, but it still manages to be precise. I didn't miss any shifts at all, and I'd say this has probably got the lightest action of any motorcycle gearbox I've ever used. It's definitely a nice gearbox, so that's another plus for the Himalayan 450. For me, the throttle response is a bit of a concern, particularly for off-road riding. Again, I mentioned in the test ride video that accelerating off of roundabouts and things, I was having to apply more throttle than I thought would normally be required. And I think this is a consequence of the ride-by-wire throttle and the way that it's set up. I don't think a lot happens to move the throttle bodies on the first part of the throttle movement. So you end up having to give the bike a reasonable handful before it will accelerate again. I think you would get used to how the throttle responds with more time on the bike, but I think it's a characteristic that's going to make off-road riding a little bit more tricky, where an instant linear throttle response is very beneficial. With the 450, I feel as though I would never be sure quite how much performance I'm going to get for any given input on the throttle. For me, the 450 Himalayan feels more top heavy than the 411. The bike I test rode had a full tank of fuel, and you really did notice the weight high up. On the 411, whether the tank is full or half full, it never really feels top heavy. So top heavy is not a great characteristic. It's something that could get you into trouble off-road. It's something that could get you into trouble just moving the bike around the garage, scooching it about without the engine running. A top heavy bike is not really ideal, and the 450 is definitely more top heavy than the 411. The 450 Himalayan, of course, comes with the new Tripper dash. So effectively this works pretty much in the same way as the Tripper pod, and it does unfortunately force you to use the Royal Enfield app. So anyway, here's a quick little segment just to show you the Tripper dash showing navigation. Unfortunately, the footage I captured of the Tripper dash was very flickery, so apologies for that. Right, so now I'll just briefly show you how the new Tripper dash on the Himalayan 450 works. Basically, it's the same procedure as with the Tripper pod, which a lot of you will be familiar with. Unfortunately, you have to do everything through the Royal Enfield app. So, first of all, you go into the Royal Enfield app and you pair your phone with the Tripper dash. So you add it as a device. As you can see here, it's been successfully added. You have to enter the code that comes up on the screen on your phone, and then the app on your phone is then paired with the Tripper dash. So the next step would be to hit connect in the Royal Enfield app. And then as you can see here, eventually you should get the message, phone connected, as we have here. So now you have to make sure that the Tripper dash is in map mode, because the various display elements have to be moved around to make sure that there's enough room to display the map. So to get the dash into map mode, you press the M button on the right hand control cube and you hold it for 3 seconds, and then the dash goes into map mode. Now you're all ready to set up your route in the Royal Enfield app. Once you set up the route, you hit get directions. Once the app has planned your route, you can click start navigation. And once you start navigation, after a little wait, you should see the moving map, here it is, appear on the Tripper dash, and you're ready to go. And that's it. And basically, once the device has been recognized and paired to your phone, normally when you open the app, you can just hit connect, and as long as the ignition's on, the app should connect to the Tripper dash without any rigmarole, and then you can get straight into planning your route or putting in the destination address. And as long as it displays in map mode, as soon as you start the navigation, you'll get the moving map displaying in the dash. So that's how it works. So that was the Tripper dash. Now, it's a nice feature, it's quite well implemented, but I'm sure that if I had a Himalayan 450, I'd use the Tripper dash just about as much as I use the Tripper pod fitted to my 2 other Royal Enfields, namely not at all. Now, there's a reason for that, and the reason for that is simply that these devices, they force you to use the proprietary software, the Royal Enfield app, for everything. So basically, you have to plan your route within the app to start with. There's no easy way to import a route into it. There's no way at all as far as I can see. And basically, I don't like to plan my routes on my mobile phone. I'd rather do it at home on a big screen and then upload it to my phone and then use my phone for navigation. So that's what I do. So although it's a nice feature, just as the Tripper pod is a nice feature with its turn-by-turn navigation, I wouldn't see myself using it because it's just too much of a faff. You're forced to use the Royal Enfield app. When you're forced to use a proprietary app, it's always going to be limiting in some way. So these things, for me, they just don't work properly. They're just not viable. The only thing that the Royal Enfield app would actually be quite good for is to navigate to an address, because then you just enter the address, hit get directions, and then you could use the navigation and it would probably get you to that address. But that's the smallest part of navigation that we motorcyclists would need. normally we use navigation to try and keep us on a route that we've meticulously planned, where we want to take in certain stretches of road, visit certain sites, and these kind of routes, they're really difficult to plan in these proprietary apps. It's almost impossible. So for that reason, I don't see the tripper navigation being any more useful on the 450 than it is to me on the 411 or the Meteor. So during my second attempt to make this video, the one which you're seeing the footage from at the moment, I did try to convince myself that, if certain conditions were met, if the vibes could be mitigated somewhat, then the Himalayan 450 would be a reasonable upgrade over my 411 and one that I could consider. So basically, the vibrations were the main thing that I was worried about, if they could be somehow resolved or reduced. The throttle response is probably going to be a bit of an issue, but I thought, no, you probably get used to that as well. So I was kind of trying to be quite positive about it. And as I rode down this trail on Norman, all of a sudden it just became clear to me that actually I already have the right bike for the job. And I'll just explain a little bit about how I came to that decision. Well, I think first of all, many of us were hoping that the Himalayan 450 would add real touring capability to the Himalayan. Now, unfortunately, because of the vibration issue, I don't think that it does that. So I think it's failed in its key mission already. So a Himalayan 450 won't be adding touring capability. And to be honest, I could go touring on Norman, and even if I felt that I needed more power, you could do a cam upgrade, you could then change the gearing and make Norman relatively comfortable at 70 miles per hour. So for me, the 450 Himalayan isn't going to add great touring capability that I'm somehow missing out on at the moment. And for the off-road thing as well, I think actually it's going to be harder work than Norman, just because Norman has that really tractable engine, that instantaneous throttle response, that it's just so easy to get the engine to pick up when you're on a tight bend on a technical trail. You know exactly how much throttle to give, and you can give the right amount of throttle. You don't have to mess about with the clutch, and you just pick the bike up exactly as you intended to. And I think with the ride-by-wire system on the 450, there's going to be a bit more guesswork involved with regard to how much the bike is going to pick up for any given throttle input. And I think that could see me maybe not getting the speed out of the bike that I'm hoping for, and maybe just toppling over. I think there could be various situations where I'd probably struggle more with the 450. I think the 450 would be great on fast open trails because it's got better quality suspension. It's less crashy, so you could actually carry a bit of speed with the 450. But the trails that I ride, they aren't fast. They're very rough. Quite often they're mountain tracks, so there's very slow hairpin bends everywhere, loose surfaces everywhere. So for me, actually, Norman is more suited to the trails that I'm riding around here. And I couldn't see an advantage to the 450 for my off-road riding either. So basically, it's failing to beat Norman on the road aspect of the riding and on the off-road aspect of the riding. So for me, at that point, I'm starting to think, as I chugged along on Norman, that actually, no, I don't need the 450 at all. It also occurred to me that the 3-in-1 rear indicators that we see here, they're going to be quite expensive to replace, I would imagine, because they're multifunction indicators. So let's say you took your 450 off-road, you dropped it, probably one of the things you're likely to break is going to be the indicators. Now compare these multifunction indicator lights with the simple basic ones to be found on a 411. Now I imagine that the 411 ones are going to be a darn sight cheaper to replace. So that's just something as an aside also that occurred to me as I was riding down this trail. So there you go. I finally decided that the 450 didn't really add anything to my road riding or my off-road riding, and that I could save my money and just stick with Norman. So yeah, probably not by design, but it looks like I bought the right Himalayan after all. For me, the 411 Himalayan remains the better all-rounder. Of course, I was hoping that the new Himalayan would prove to be the better road bike, but for me, because of the vibrations, it simply isn't. Hopefully Royal Enfield can do something to mitigate that. Just something to isolate the rider from the engine's vibrations would be helpful, I'm sure. And of course, off-road, I think the 450 is probably not suited to the sort of trails that I ride, and it might actually create more problems for me than the 411. So there you go. After much consideration, and at the third attempt, I finally came to the conclusion that the Himalayan 450 isn't going to be the bike for me. Ruby has been very patiently waiting outside my office for me to finish recording this voiceover, so now I'm off to give Ruby a well-earned sausage. Thanks as always for watching. I hope you found this video informative and possibly a little bit useful, and I look forward to seeing you in the next one. Bye bye.
So Ruby, you did an awesome job of looking after the house for Daddy, so it's time for sausages. And these sausages are still from Stefan, Doro and Ramses. Look, yes I know, German sausages. Sausages. German sausages. Dankeschön.